I went hiking early one morning in late October. The air had that cold bite that hits your skin before the sun fully rises. I could see my breath in front of me as I stepped out of my car and pulled my backpack onto my shoulders. The trail was long and not very popular, which was the main reason I picked it. I liked quiet hikes where I didn't have to deal with people or noise. I thought it would feel peaceful and calm, but the silence that morning felt different. It wasn't relaxing, felt heavy. The trail started out wide and open, with frost-covered grass on both sides. My boots crunched loudly with every step, and the whole forest felt half asleep. As I kept walking, the trail narrowed and the trees closed in tighter. The forest floor was covered in dead leaves, pine needles, and broken branches. Every sound seemed louder than normal. I kept hearing small noises behind me, twigs snapping, leaves shifting, but I kept convincing myself it was just animals or my own footsteps echoing strangely. After about 2 hours of hiking, I reached an old broken trail sign. The wood was cracked and leaning to one side, and most of the paint had worn away. The trail split there. The marked path went left, and the other path looked barely used. It didn't have a sign at all. Leaves had piled on it, and small branches lay across it like no one had stepped there in a long time. I don't know why, but I decided to take the unmarked one. Maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity. Either way, I stepped over the branches and walked forward. Right away, the air felt colder. The trees were closer together, and there was less sunlight reaching the ground. I could smell damp earth and rotting leaves. The silence felt heavier on this path, almost like the forest was listening. As I walked, I noticed odd things. Strips of tree bark peeled off in straight lines, piles of rocks stacked in messy towers, and an old rusted tin can hanging from a low branch by a piece of wire. It swung gently as if someone had touched it recently. I kept going because turning around felt embarrassing, even if no one was there to see me. I told myself maybe it was old trash from campers or hunters. Another hour passed before I reached a small clearing. In the middle of the clearing was a fire pit, cold but clearly used not long ago. Ash was still gray and soft, not washed away by rain or wind. Around the fire pit were footprints, messy and deep in the dirt. There were a lot of them, all different, overlapping, like multiple people had been walking in circles around it. My stomach tightened, and my hands felt cold even though I wore gloves. Something about it felt wrong. I didn't want to stay there long, so I kept walking, moving fast. Not long after that, I spotted something through the trees that made me stop. A tent. It looked old but not abandoned. The fabric was dirty and stained, but not torn. The ropes were tight and the stakes looked new. There were boots sitting beside the entrance. Not tipped over, not muddy. Just sitting there neatly. I didn't want to go near it, so I stayed on the trail and kept walking. But right after I passed it, I heard something. It wasn't loud, just a soft dragging sound, like fabric sliding on dirt, then twigs breaking, then footsteps. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, but slower, listening. The footsteps matched my pace. Every step I took, I heard another one behind me. Not too close, but close enough that I could hear the rhythm. I tried to convince myself it was an animal, but the pattern was too controlled, too exact. Animals don't walk in the same pace as a person. They move uneven, fast then slow. This was steady. My breathing got heavier, and I could feel my heart beating harder. The forest felt smaller and darker, like the trees were closing in around me. I finally looked back. Not fully, just a quick glance over my shoulder. No one was there, but the feeling didn't go away. I could still hear something behind me, hidden just out of sight. I sped up. My boots hit the ground harder, leaves kicking up. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just wanted to be far from that campsite and whoever might be there. At some point, the footsteps stopped, but that somehow made it worse. The silence felt closer, heavier, like something was waiting. Eventually, the unmarked path reconnected with the main trail. The open space felt like fresh air. I could see sunlight again, and the forest felt normal. But I didn't slow down. I kept moving fast, not stopping to rest or look around. As I neared the end of the trail, I passed one last strange thing. A tree with something carved into it. It wasn't a word or initials. Just deep, uneven scratches like someone dragged a knife through the bark again and again. The cuts looked fresh, like the wood hadn't had time to darken. When I finally saw my car through the trees, I felt a wave of relief. My legs were tired and shaky, and my throat felt dry. When I reached the car, I dropped my pack in the back seat and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. Before I started the engine, I looked back at the trail. The forest looked normal from there. Quiet, calm, harmless. But then I saw movement far back in the shadows. Just a shape, not clear enough to see details. Not moving fast, just standing there, watching. I didn't wait to see more. I drove away fast, not looking in the mirrors. I still think about it sometimes, how someone was living out there with no sign, no official trail, nothing marked. Someone who didn't speak, didn't get close, but followed me just enough to know I was there. Someone who watched me walk alone and never stepped out where I could see them. There was nothing supernatural about it. No ghost, no monster, just a person living deep in the woods, where no one ever goes. And for a few hours I was in their home. That thought scares me more than anything. I went hiking in late September, during that weird time when it's not fully cold yet, but the air feels different. The leaves had just started changing, and most people had stopped hiking for the season. That was actually the reason I went. Less people on the trail, more silence, more space. I thought it would feel peaceful, but instead it made everything feel empty and strange. The trail was a long loop through a forested mountain area, with one small campground somewhere around the middle. I planned to hike the full loop in 2 days and camp overnight. I packed light: a tent, food, water filter, basic gear. Nothing unusual. Right from the start, the forest felt different than usual. It wasn't windy, but the trees creaked and swayed like something heavy was pushing against them. The air felt thick and cool, and every step seemed louder than it should have been. Even the birds weren't making sounds like they normally do. Most of the trail was covered in fallen leaves, dry and brittle under my boots, making that constant crunching sound that echoed around the trees. As the hours passed, I noticed that I wasn't seeing any other hikers. No fresh footprints, no old campfire smoke, nothing. It was just me and miles of quiet woods. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was normal for late-season trails to be empty. But after a while, the silence started feeling uncomfortable. Not peaceful, just too quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. Around late afternoon, I reached an open clearing and took a short break. My legs felt heavy, and my shoulders were sore from the pack. I sat down on a fallen log and drank water. That's when I noticed something strange. A tree stump nearby had deep-cut marks on it. Not small ones from a pocket knife, but long, rough, uneven marks, like someone tore at it with a dull blade or even something not meant for cutting wood at all. The bark around the stump was peeled off in strips, hanging loose like skin. There was no reason for someone to do that. It didn't look like carving or firewood cutting. It looked angry. I felt uneasy, so I got up and kept walking. The trail narrowed the deeper I went, until the trees felt like they were closing in around me. The light faded fast, way faster than I expected. With all the leaves overhead, the sky almost disappeared, leaving only a dim, filtered light. By the time the sun started setting, I finally reached the small campsite marked on the map. It was just a flat space near a stream, with an old broken picnic table and a small fire ring filled with cold ash. Something about the ash bothered me. It was wet, but it hadn't rained in days. It looked like someone poured water over it recently. I set up my tent quickly, trying not to think too much about everything that felt off. The temperature dropped hard after sunset. Late September always brings cold nights, but this felt extra sharp, like winter was creeping in early. I made a small fire and ate dinner. Sitting there in the dim light of the flames, I kept hearing sounds in the woods. Not normal animal sounds, just movement, leaves shifting, soft, slow crunching like footsteps, but too controlled to be random wildlife. Every time I turned, everything stopped. The fire eventually burned low, and I crawled into my tent. The ground felt uneven under my sleeping bag, and my body wouldn't relax. The forest was silent again. No wind, no water sounds from the stream, no insects. It was the kind of silence that makes your own breathing sound too loud. I don't know how long I laid there awake before I finally drifted into a light sleep, but I woke up to a sound that sent fear through my whole body. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps moving around the tent. I stayed perfectly still. My heart was hitting my ribs so hard I felt sick. The footsteps didn't rush or shuffle. They moved like someone confident, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. At one point, the steps stopped right beside me. I could hear slow breathing outside the thin fabric of my tent. Not an animal, not a deer or a bear. The rhythm was too controlled, too steady. Then the breathing stopped, and everything went silent again. I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring at the tent roof in the darkness, waiting for the steps to return. They never did. As soon as the sky turned the faintest gray, I packed up everything. My hands were cold and shaky, and I kept checking around me even though I saw nobody. Before leaving, I noticed something near where I set my fire. Boot prints that weren't mine. Larger, deeper. They circled the tent before leading back toward the woods. I walked fast, almost jogging, following the trail out. The forest felt even more empty during the return hike, but now it wasn't peaceful emptiness. It felt like something was watching, like the silence wasn't natural. Every so often, I heard sticks breaking behind me, but when I stopped, everything stopped with me. I didn't turn around anymore because I didn't want to see anything. The trail felt longer on the way back. Hours passed, and my body felt tense the entire time. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the parking lot through the trees. My car was the only one there. Before I opened the door, I turned and looked back at the trail entrance. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing far down the path, just a dark shape between the trees. Not moving, just watching. I didn't wait. I got in, locked the doors, and drove away. The farther I got from the woods, the more my body relaxed, but my hands stayed tight on the wheel. I never reported it because nothing technically happened. No attack, no proof, no face, nothing. Just footprints, breathing, and the feeling of someone walking around my tent in the middle of an empty forest. That was months ago, and I still think about it. Sometimes I replay those footsteps in my head, wondering who was out there, why they followed me, why they didn't do anything. The worst part is knowing they were human. Not a ghost, not an animal. A real person. Someone who walked around my tent on purpose. Someone who stood inches away from me while I slept. Someone who never said a word. I went hiking in early November, when the air feels sharp and everything in the woods smells like cold dirt and wet leaves. The sky was pale and dull when I parked my car at the small gravel lot near the trailhead. There were no other cars there, which made the place feel more isolated than I expected. I pulled on my backpack, locked the doors, and started walking toward the beginning of the trail. The first part of the hike felt normal. The trail was wide and clear, lined with tall trees that swayed slowly in the light wind. Fallen leaves covered everything, and every step I took made a loud crunching noise. The forest felt open at first, like there was enough space between the trees to breathe easily. The smell of pine and the faint odor of damp moss made everything feel calm. As I walked deeper into the woods, the trail started narrowing and curving. The trees grew closer together and blocked most of the sky. The deeper I went, the darker it got. My footsteps echoed strangely, like the forest was empty of everything except me. I hadn't seen any animals, not even birds. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was the kind of silence that feels like something is wrong. After about an hour and a half of hiking, I reached a small wooden bridge crossing a shallow creek. The wood looked old and slightly warped, but stable enough to walk on. The water below barely moved, just a thin stream sliding over rocks. As I crossed the bridge, I noticed something odd. Shoe prints in the mud, going across the bridge ahead of me. Fresh ones. They looked deeper than mine, like the person was heavier or carrying more weight. I kept going, telling myself it was normal. Maybe someone was ahead of me and I just hadn't seen them yet. Still, I didn't like how the tracks seemed to wander off the trail into the woods at one point, like the person had stepped off the path and gone somewhere else. Another hour passed before I came to a clearing. There was an old picnic table there, almost hidden under leaves and moss. The wood was cracked and splintered. Someone had scratched a long line across the top as if dragging something sharp over it again and again. The sight of it made me uneasy. I didn't sit down. I just adjusted my pack and kept moving. As I walked, the trail became rougher. Roots and rocks stuck out of the dirt, and fallen branches forced me to step carefully. The air felt colder. My breath came out in long white clouds. At one point, I heard a sound behind me. Something like a faint footstep or maybe a branch snapping. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing. The silence felt almost thick. I waited a few seconds longer, then forced myself to keep moving. The further I walked, the worse the feeling in my chest got. It wasn't panic, but something close to it, like a warning. Around mid-afternoon, I reached a small hill. The trail went up sharply, so I used my hands to steady myself against trees as I climbed. When I got to the top, I froze. Down the other side of the hill, maybe 30 or 40 yards away, was a campsite. A tent stood there, dark green, zipped shut and clean, like it had been set up recently. A fire pit sat beside it. The ashes inside looked fresh and undisturbed, like someone had put the fire out not long ago. Next to the fire pit was a pair of boots, big ones, facing the trail. Everything was too neat, too organized. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to go closer, so I stayed where I was, staring from a distance. Nothing moved. No sound came from the tent. I kept glancing around, looking for someone, but the woods stayed still. I slowly backed away from the hill and turned around to follow the trail back the way I came. But something changed. The woods didn't feel empty anymore. The silence now felt like it was paying attention to me. My steps were fast, and I kept looking over my shoulder. At one point, I heard footsteps behind me, not my own. Soft, steady steps, matching my pace. They weren't loud, but they were clear enough that I knew they were real. Every time I stopped walking, the footsteps stopped too. Not delayed, not changing speed, perfectly matched. I didn't look behind me again. My heart was racing, and my fingers felt numb around the straps of my backpack. The trees seemed darker now, like the sky was fading even though it wasn't close to sunset yet. I moved faster and faster until I was almost jogging, leaves flying under my feet. The footsteps stayed behind me the whole time, never closer, never farther. When I reached the wooden bridge again, I didn't slow down. I crossed it quickly, gripping the railing for balance. As soon as my boots hit the other side, the footsteps stopped. Completely. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, breathing hard, trying to stay calm. The trail widened again, and the sight of open space ahead felt like relief. When I finally reached the parking lot, my car was still the only one there. I unlocked it with shaking hands and threw my backpack into the back seat. Before getting in, I looked toward the trail one last time. Someone was standing at the far edge of the path, half hidden behind a tree. I couldn't see details, just the shape of a person. Still, not moving toward me, not retreating, just watching. I got in the car, locked the doors, and started driving. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, and I kept checking the rearview mirror even though I knew no one was behind me. When I got home, I unpacked my gear like I normally do. Everything seemed fine until I grabbed my sleeping bag. Something was smeared faintly across the bottom. Dirt, maybe mud, maybe something else. A long fingerprint-like mark. That's when I realized something. Someone must have touched my gear when I wasn't looking. Probably back at the clearing or near the bridge. Someone who followed me without rushing, without speaking, without ever stepping into view. No ghost, no monster, just a real person who knew the woods better than I did. Someone who stayed hidden and walked behind me the whole time, close enough to reach me if they wanted. Someone who let me leave. That thought still sits with me, and the more I think about it, the more I understand something important. I didn't escape because I was fast. I left because whoever was out there decided not to stop me. I went hiking in late autumn, when most trails were empty and most people were already done with camping and outdoor stuff for the year. The air felt cold but dry, and the sky had that pale gray color that makes everything look flat and quiet. I had planned the hike a week earlier, and even though something in my gut felt off that morning, I still went. The drive to the trailhead took almost 2 hours, mostly through small winding mountain roads with long stretches of forest and no houses in sight. When I finally reached the gravel pull-off where the trail started, there were no other cars, just mine. I stepped out and stretched. The wind was light, and the forest around me looked still. The trees were tall and bare in some places, with patches of orange and brown leaves still clinging to a few branches. The ground was covered in dead leaves and damp pine needles. Everything smelled like cold dirt and bark. I tightened the straps on my backpack and started walking. The first part of the trail was wide and clear. My boots made crunching noises with every step, and the sound echoed weirdly through the woods. The longer I walked, the more I noticed how quiet everything was. No birds, no insects, just the constant rhythm of my own steps. About 40 minutes in, I saw something strange. An old jacket hanging from a tree branch. It was dirty and faded, one sleeve torn. At first, I thought someone hung it there after losing it, but the way it hung didn't look random. It looked placed. I ignored it and kept going. The trail eventually narrowed and curved deeper into the trees. The light faded a little, and the air felt colder. I stopped at one point to drink water and adjust my pack. While I stood there, I heard something far off, just a soft thump. Then another, like slow, heavy steps somewhere in the distance. I stood still and listened. After a few seconds, the sound stopped. I tried to convince myself it was a deer or maybe a branch falling, but something about it felt deliberate. I started walking again, but now I kept checking over my shoulder every minute or so. About another hour passed before I reached a small clearing. There was a fire ring there with cold ash inside, and next to it was something that made my stomach tighten. A large boot print in the dirt. Fresh, deep, the kind someone would leave if they stood there recently, maybe that morning. I scanned the trees around me, trying not to look nervous even though I was alone. The forest felt tight and watchful. I didn't stop to rest. I just kept moving. Eventually, the trail led uphill. The climb was steep enough that breathing became harder and my legs burned. When I reached the top, the view should have been nice, the forest spread below, hills in the distance, but I didn't feel relaxed looking at it. The wind up there felt colder and sharper, like winter waiting just out of sight. As I stood there, catching my breath, I saw something down the trail ahead. A small wooden structure, maybe an old hunting blind or an abandoned shed. The wood looked weather-worn and gray, and the roof sagged. Something about it made me uneasy immediately, but curiosity made me walk closer. The closer I got, the stranger it became. There were drag marks in the dirt near the entrance, long and uneven. Not neat lines like from a shovel or cart. More like something heavy had been pulled through leaves and soil. I stopped about 10 feet from the entrance. The shed was dark inside. I couldn't see much past the doorway. As I stood there, staring, I noticed something leaned against the wall. An old metal canteen and a pair of gloves, dirty but not rusted or falling apart. They didn't look old enough to belong to whoever built the shed. They looked like they belonged to someone still using the place. My chest felt tight. I backed away slowly and turned around to continue down the trail. Not even 10 minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps. Not close, but following. Slow, careful, like someone didn't want me to hear them but also wasn't rushing. I didn't look back. I just walked faster. My breathing got heavier, and my hands felt shaky. Every small sound, the cracking of branches, the shifting of leaves, made me twitch. Eventually, I reached a part of the forest where the trail was barely visible under the leaves. My map said the path looped, but nothing looked familiar. I kept moving forward, hoping I was heading the right way. Then I saw something ahead. A backpack leaning against a tree. Not old, not dirty. A modern hiking pack with straps tightened neatly and nothing torn or broken. Someone left it there on purpose. Beside it was another boot print, and beside that, a long drag mark leading off the trail into thicker trees. My whole body went cold. I didn't touch anything. I didn't look closely. I just turned around and started moving back the way I came, faster than before. The forest suddenly felt too quiet, too still. About halfway back to the car, I heard the footsteps again. This time closer, still measured, still steady. I never turned around. I just walked faster and faster, almost running by the last stretch. When I finally saw my car, I felt an overwhelming rush of relief. My keys were already in my hand. I threw my pack into the back seat, shut the door hard, and locked every lock before even starting the engine. Before driving away, I made the mistake of looking toward the tree line. Someone was standing there, far enough that I could only make out the outline, but close enough that I knew they were watching me. Not moving, not hiding, just staring. I tore my eyes away, started the car, and drove as fast as I safely could down that narrow road without looking in the mirrors. The whole drive home, my hands shook. I've thought about it a lot since that day. About the footprints, the shed, the backpack, the dragging marks, the silence, and the fact that someone followed me without ever speaking or showing their face. There was nothing supernatural about it, nothing unreal, just a person. Someone who lived out there, walked those woods, and watched strangers walk near their space. And the worst part isn't that they followed me. The worst part is knowing they could have stepped closer anytime they wanted. But they didn't. They let me leave. And sometimes I wonder how many people walked that trail and never made it back to the parking lot at all. I went hiking earlier this year in late spring, when the weather was finally warm enough to enjoy long trails without dealing with snow or mud. The place I chose wasn't a very popular one, which was kind of the reason I wanted to go there. I liked quiet places where I didn't have to pass random groups of loud hikers or families taking pictures every 5 minutes. The trail was deep in a forest preserve area, surrounded by thick woods, a few hills, and a couple of old fire roads people barely used anymore. When I pulled into the dirt parking area, there were only 2 other cars parked there. Both were dusty and older looking, which made me think maybe they belonged to hunters or workers clearing something. The place felt unusually silent. No wind, no birds, no bugs buzzing around, just quiet. I got out of my car, stretched, put on my pack, and started walking toward the trail. The first mile or so felt normal. The path was clear, and the air smelled like pine needles and damp soil. The ground was soft under the leaves, and every step I took made a muffled crunching sound. I could hear a small stream nearby, and for a moment everything felt calm. But the deeper I went, the more things started to feel off, not wrong, just off. The woods became denser, and sunlight barely reached the ground. The trail got thinner too, like fewer people came out this far. I saw no broken branches from recent hikers, no fresh footprints, nothing except natural forest patterns. Eventually, the trail cut across an old rusted fence line. The fence didn't block the path, it just continued off into the trees like it once meant something but now didn't matter. The metal wires sagged and some posts had fallen over. One piece of fencing looked bent outward, almost like someone forced their way through it. Not an animal. Too straight, too intentional. After that, the feeling of being watched slowly crept in. I couldn't explain it. There was no noise, no obvious reason to feel it, but the sensation stayed. Like eyes were somewhere behind the trees or deeper in the shadows. Another hour passed before I noticed something beside the trail. A smashed flashlight lying in the dirt. It had a cracked casing and dried mud stuck around the switch. It looked like someone had stepped on it hard. I nudged it with my boot and moved on, trying not to let my imagination run. The trail climbed a hill, and at the top, I stopped to drink water. That's when I heard it. A twig snapping. Not a small one either, one thick enough that an animal stepping on it would make a noticeable sound. I froze and listened. My heartbeat sounded louder than anything else. After a long moment, everything went silent again. I waited maybe 30 seconds more before continuing down the other side of the hill, but I picked up my pace without meaning to. Down in the valley area, I saw something else unusual. A backpack leaning against a tree off the trail. A newer one. Nothing ripped or weather damaged. The straps were buckled neatly like someone had placed it there carefully. I stared at it from the trail and didn't get any closer. Something about it made my stomach tighten. I turned and kept hiking. About 10 minutes later, I saw a structure ahead, an old fire tower. The metal looked rusted but stable. The ladder was still attached and visible from the trail. There was something eerie about seeing a man-made structure sitting deep in the woods with no noise, no movement, and no sign of activity. But then I noticed something that was hard to ignore. Fresh muddy boot prints leading toward the tower. Large prints, deep enough to show weight. And there were more than one set, 3, maybe 4, all heading in the same direction, but none coming back. My throat went dry. I didn't go near the tower. I walked past it slowly, trying not to crunch leaves too loudly. A few minutes after passing it, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, steady, and deliberate. Not rushed, not cautious, just steady. I didn't turn around. My pace increased again, but the steps stayed behind me. Not too close, not far enough to fade. Always there. My breathing grew uneven, and the hairs on my arms were standing straight up. I could feel adrenaline kicking in. My vision sharpened and every sound seemed louder. The trail finally widened and I recognized part of it from earlier. I was looping back toward the start. That should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Not with the footsteps still behind me, following with the same calm rhythm. I reached the old fence line again and stepped over it. The moment my boot hit the dirt on the other side, the footsteps stopped. Dead silent. I didn't turn around. I didn't check. I forced myself to keep walking forward. When the parking lot finally came into view, relief hit me so hard I felt lightheaded. But that relief changed the second I noticed something. There were now 3 cars in the lot, not 2. The new one was a dark green SUV. The windows were tinted to the point I couldn't see anything inside. But the strange part, the unsettling part, was what sat on its roof. The same brand and color backpack I saw leaning against the tree earlier. I stood there a few seconds, frozen. I scanned the tree line and the trail behind me. Nothing moved. No footsteps. No voices. No figures. But I could feel something, someone still watching. I didn't take off my gear properly. I just threw my pack in the back, got into my car, locked the doors, and started driving. My hands were shaking so badly that I kept gripping the steering wheel harder to steady them. When I turned onto the main road, I finally looked in the mirror, not because I wanted to, but because something in me needed to know. Clear road. Then, just before the forest disappeared behind the curve, I saw a figure step out from the trees near the lot. Not close enough to see a face, not close enough to be clear. Just enough to show they had been there the entire time watching me leave. No ghost. No supernatural presence. Just a real person living out there where most people never go. And the part that still bothers me most isn't that they followed me. It's that they had chances, multiple chances, to confront me, stop me, or speak. But they never did. They only watched. Like they were studying me. Like next time they might not stop at just watching. I haven't gone hiking alone since.